Hello, all. Good morning, good afternoon, maybe good evening. We're so excited to have you here today for another How Good webinar. This is going to be a bit of a technical deep dive um, brought about by lots and lots of questions on land use change. This is an area that is quickly evolving, methodology quickly evolving, and as How Good, we get lots of questions from our customers and others in the industry. So we've brought on our research folks, and we're going to really have a good time getting a little bit nerdy today on land use change, dLUC, sLUC, also dLUC, and emerging guidance. Let's go ahead to the next slide and look at what we're going to be talking about. Yep. All right, so we're going to take a quick overview of land use change measurement. We'll do a deep dive into dLUC, sLUC, and dLUC, and then really spend quite a bit of time on Q&A from you all. So we have here JD Capuano. He is HowGood's Director of Research, and he'll be really walking through a lot of this information today. We're also joined by Arthur Gillette, HowGood's co-founder and Chief Research Officer, who will be madly answering questions in the chat as they come in, and then also join us for the Q&A at the end. So please feel free to drop any questions you have. We're really, really happy to field them to the best of our ability. Now, right before we get in, I also want to just bring your attention to our next webinar. JD, if you can advance to that. Scope 3 rebaselining. This is the other most often asked about area right now in the industry. So we're so excited to be offering a webinar together with the Science-Based Target Initiative. That's Tuesday, June 2nd. My colleague Kate will drop a link to that in the chat for anyone to sign up who hasn't already. With that, I'm Eva Clark. I'm the VP of Marketing and Communications, and I am going to hand it over to the experts to take you through land use change. All right, JD, take it away.
Thanks, Eva. And hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And excited to talk with you today about land use change. And this is a continuation of what's turning into a series here at HowGood. So the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, they published the Land Sector and Removals Standard, version 1, in the end of January of this year. And in March, we had a webinar that was really a first look at the Land Sector and Removal Standard, or LSRS, as many of us call it. And that covers a number of different calculations that are required, and one of which I think has been one that a lot of companies and have been working on in the last few years since the draft guidance of the land sector and removals was published, is land use change. So continuing on from the kind of broader look we had, we're going to go a little bit more into land use change today. And the heart of this work is really around traceability. That's become very clear in the publication of LSRS, that we are looking at, how far up your supply system are you able to get traceability? And that may vary depending on what product or commodity or ingredient that we're talking about that you source. You may have some hero ingredients where you do have traceability to a certain extent up the supply system. But you may be in retail or food service and have very limited to no traceability. But traceability is really the starting point for all of this work. And by traceability, it's, what level of traceability do we have? This is a table from Land Sector Removals Standard, and it gets into, there's three kind of key levels that you see in terms of the types of traceability that are not applicable, physical traceability recommended, and physical traceability required. So what does that mean, right? Get it going across the table here. We kind of have this unknown level of origin of where anything is coming from. And in that case, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol is recommending a global spatial boundary. So what is the actual geography that we're measuring in terms of spatial boundary? If the jurisdiction is known, and jurisdiction could be a country or another political region of origin. It could be, say, the European Union. It could be the state of Mato Grosso in Brazil, right? So that could be the different levels of jurisdiction, and that's where, if you've got that, that's an improvement, and it gives you options in your land use change calculations that we'll get into in subsequent slides. The next level of detail is the sourcing region. So this is typically centered around a processing facility. Let's say, for sake of example, a grain mill, and that grain mill is being fed by farms within a certain radius, and that could be, say, 100 kilometers or shorter distance. And looking at that as your point of reference and looking at, okay, what are the farms in the sourcing region, and using that as your spatial boundary. Going more granular in physical traceability, there could be known land management units. A land management unit could be a farm with multiple fields and plots. It could be a field or a plot within the farm, and then the lowest level is the harvested area. So you could have part of a plot dedicated to a certain crop, and there's a polygon for that, and then there's other information required to make the direct land use change calculations, and that is an yeah, that it would be collected at that level. So that's the most granular that we can go. So what does this mean? Just to give an example of what this looks like. So unknown, right? We're working with a global map using global data, the least amount of granularity, country or state. Looking here, it could be, say, something like the state, country of Colombia, sourcing region, the kind of centroid being a mill or some sort of processing facility. You're seeing an example of what that could look like over here, and then getting into that more granular level of what are the polygons representing? So polygon being, the geospatial coordinates that have all of the boundaries required, not just, say, a latitude and longitudinal crosshairs on a map, but specifying the boundaries. So those are the levels of traceability that we look at when we're getting into, if you don't have polygon data, but you've got, say, country or state data. There's also information in the standard that gets into what is that level of traceability? So is it thinking of it uses the same language as you would find in RSPO for Palm, where it has, say, identity preserved or segregated, mass balance, etc. So you can say, like, okay, if I know it's from this certain country, what level of traceability do I have to be able to make certain calculations? Um, so thinking about this practically, you've got statistical land use change that it was introduced in the draft guidance for land sector removals. You've got jurisdictional land use change, and then you've got the dLUC. So getting into really the direct polygon data that you have. So sLUC, or statistical land use change, you're using averages. We'll look in a subsequent slide of where it can be applied. This has been the workhorse for portfolio averages where companies don't have traceability as they're looking to gain traceability up the supply system. JDLUC has really emerged, and this is where we're paying the most attention and see a lot of potential when companies aren't able to get that granular data for dLUC, say the polygon data, but you're able to get the jurisdictional level data. We see a lot of potential that we'll talk about here. And then lastly, dLUC, we've got some companies that we work with that are pursuing dLUC. They've getting information on the ground, the polygons. There's certain yield data from whatever the spatial boundary is, and then other kind of purchasing data that are required to calculate. And a number of companies are doing that. One thing to note about the spatial boundaries, I'm just going to backtrack one moment to this slide. If it'll allow me. Actually, I'm not, but all right. So what we looked at with the five levels for spatial boundaries from global down to the harvested area. Um, Land sector removal standard has specified you're supposed to choose that for a product type. Let's say you're purchasing palm. So you're going to do all of your calculations. If you've got dLUC data, you should be doing all of your calculations based on dLUC data. If you've got limited data, everything should be based on what you have at the spatial boundary level for statistical land use change. Um, and Like I said, there's opportunities for flexibility still within the standard, even though they've made certain things more consistent and harmonized, which is really good for us from an accounting standpoint. Um, Speaking of that, with statistical land use change, you could choose, um, there were two different metrics as part of the calculation or terms of the equation. One was linear discounting, the other was equal discounting. In the draft guidance, you could choose either. You could also choose shared responsibility or product expansion. So you could have service providers and consultants and platforms that you're working with that made different decisions and possibly used different data sets and had other different inputs, resulting in wildly different results. So, what the standard does is it moves us towards harmonization. It doesn't take us all the way there. There still can be differences with input data, with assumptions that are made before you get to the statistical land use change calculation, but you do have the options if you have no traceability and you're using global data, you calculate statistical land use change. If you do have jurisdictional level traceability, you can still use statistical land use change. And even if you get to the sourcing region, that spatial boundary, say that's centered around a processing facility, you can still use statistical land use change if you don't have all the other information required to calculate, say, jurisdictional land use change. But moving over towards the middle of this table, jurisdictional land use change, if you've got jurisdictional traceability, say the country of origin or state, or again, it could be supranational, like the European Union, then you're able to go and do that jurisdictional approach. For sourcing region, same thing. And we'll get into what you need for those calculations in a moment. Lastly, the land management level for direct land use change, you really need to be at that land management unit, so a farm, a field, a plot, or that harvested area. All right, so how is sLUC calculated? You need a minimum of 20 years of a look back period to understand land use changes, and that could be deforestation, but it's not just deforestation. There could be other conversion factors, say from grasslands, from drained organic soils, and conversion to pasture. And then you would need commodity production statistics and then reference carbon stocks for native ecosystems. And the methodology is really you go through the gross conversion to commodity production. What does that mean? Let's say you've got a candy bar and there's some chocolate ingredients and some sugar ingredients. Well, how do you translate that back to the raw commodity and the volumes that the amount of sugar or cacao or chocolate result in the amount of cacao or sugar input needed times whatever the purchased volumes are for your organization. And in these multi-output systems where, in sugarcane, you can make granulated sugar and molasses, or in chocolate production, you have multiple outputs. You're going to have an allocation. So you've got to consider that to kind of backtrack to the commodity level. Then it's linear time discounting. So equal is out, it's only linear. And then product expansion allocation, shared responsibility is out. And then lastly, you've got to divide by regional commodity production here. For direct land use change calculations, the formula is clearly laid out in the land sector and removal standard, but the inputs required include polygon level traceability. Again, it's a minimum of 20-year look back period. There you have statistically representative sampling across attributable productive lands. And then some of the other inputs required are, coverage of natural factors, say climate, soil type, land conversion type, and then also total yield, which is going to be important, and then the sourcing ratio for the company that's purchasing from either that land management unit or that harvested area, or a combination of those within one or more geographies. For JDLUC or jurisdictional land use change calculations, it's kind of a mix, right? There's some calculations that are similar to dLUC, but you need the jurisdictional level information of the total production within that jurisdiction, and then what's attributable to your sourcing. So again, that's clearly laid out in the standard, and there's a land sector and removals guidance version 1, so moving out of draft into the first version that's expected to be published in the end of Q2. We were on a call with some colleagues from WRI yesterday, and it sounds like that's still on track for the end of June. So keep your eyes out for that. It's going to have more information about the calculations in the how-tos. And just lastly, before we open it up to Q&A, I mean, the real goal here is data harmonization. Like I said in the beginning, the LSRS is an important step towards that. One of the things that HowGood is in investing our time in to really support harmonization is in partnership with the World Resources Institute. Their Land and Carbon Lab has started a group. This is now phase 2 of that work. It's called the Land Emissions Alliance Partnership, and HowGood, along with Qantas and Blanc and Ad Astra, are core alliance partners in making that work happen. HowGood, we're also working to support our customers not only on sLUC, JDLUC, but when they've got data for dLUC, and we've got partners we're working with that can provide the satellite data with the polygons we need over time. And Intelligence is one of those partners that we've been working with some of our customers. So it's exciting. I think there's a lot of opportunity here, and happy to answer questions you all have about land use change.
Thanks so much, JD. All right, so we've got questions starting to come in. And Arthur, I think I'll ask you this first one, which you responded to a bit, regarding rebaselining. And you can respond to that live because I know that we get lots of questions on this topic. So if you move a halo commodity, say, or any commodity really, from sLUC to dLUC, or you change your methodology, and that the land use change number drops, how do you disclose that? What does SBTI feel about rebaselining? What does that trigger?
I mean, it really depends on your relationship to that commodity. If it's one of your central commodities and it's driving more than, say, a 5% reduction, then you probably do want to rebaseline. Honestly, I think it's also important that people don't assume dLUC or JDLUC will necessarily reduce their emissions. It will change your baseline from which you are then in a better position to reduce your emissions. And that's actually a better way of thinking about it. It's also honestly a better outlook for your company, right? If you know whether it's high or low where you're starting, and you're not dependent on a global change for reducing your land use change emissions, you're dependent on a change specifically in your supply chain, or within a supply chain in which you're a decently sized player. Say if you're a large confectioner sourcing cacao, right, you can actually have an impact. And if you've got JDLUC or dLUC in place, you're going to see those changes. I keep telling our customers that the cool thing about dLUC is not your starting point, because that could be higher or lower, which is actually immaterial because it's your base year. It's that by setting that, you are setting your timer to reductions, because the 20-year look back is shrinking on land that you've already assigned to it, right? And so every year your dLUC actually goes down. So it's worth it, like, set the clock now, because otherwise you're just losing time.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, another question. I think it's about sort of splitting your measurement across a single commodity. So What if on dLUC approach, your polygon coverage is not 100% covered for a unit? Can you estimate, for example, 60% coverage, and then extrapolate the 40% to cover 100% of that unit?
No, treat them as separately sourced materials. So you would assign, say, sLUC or dLUC to the 40% and do dLUC for the 60%.
Great, thanks so much. All right. Regarding dLUC, remote sensing seems to have challenges with differentiating managed grassland categories. How would you suggest that folks on the call address this challenge? For example, oats might get flagged as grassland 18 years ago, but the oats were a cash crop, for example. Any thoughts on that? Go for it.
I mean, basically, our real thoughts are not to nitpick individual details, but to trust the systems and work to improve the systems. They are getting better and better and better and continue to rebaseline, right? I think our clients that are, say, cacao is such a great example, right? We see a really great and difficult discussion with Global Forest Watch data on pruning in cacao and whether that gets triggered as a land use change number that a company shouldn't be accountable for. But those models for interpreting the imagery are improving all the time, and we can rebaseline. And by committing and working from that baseline, you are actually helping to normalize and institutionalize those models, and you're getting good numbers, better numbers than you would with sLUC, and you're moving it forward, and any changes you make will be there. And again, starting high to move low is not really the end of the world, right? Like there are not people out there, there are not individuals out there who buy your products who are tracking your total emissions, but they will respond to hey, we reduced by 30%. And honestly, starting with the high and real number and actually reducing by 30% is a better way to their hearts than starting with a low number and reducing by 2%, you know? So I don't think over worrying about that is actually worth it.
Perfect. We're all trying to find a way to each other's hearts here.
And
All
I
right,
just have one thought to add to that. I
please.
think is really the question as posed about oats and grasslands really interesting, especially as we've seen land use change in northern hemispheres where oats are encroaching north. It's I would talk also with whomever is your polygon provider, who's this, providing the satellite data and what other tools are they using? Often there are AI tools, and are they able to capture if some sort of land use change event occurred, like clearing of grasses, to be able to plant the oats in the first place. So also really work with your provider there, or whomever is your platform working with that provider on your behalf, asking them.
Perfect. And we got a question on how AI is changing that landscape literally as you were speaking. So it sounds like there's definitely some interest there. All right, next question. Are the same methodologies applied to removals? I know there's lots of questions about removals from land use, agroforestry, for example, to monitor over the next 20 years. Go
There,
ahead, JD.
There is monitoring that has to happen in perpetuity, basically. I don't know of a 20-year cutoff specifically, but it's basically if you begin to monitor removals and you're doing that, you need to continue to monitor removals. And if you stop monitoring them and reporting them once you've begun, you basically have to claim that carbon back onto your accounting. So that's just it's basically once you start, you don't stop.
Perfect. All right, Arthur, this one's for you. This is someone who's looking at product carbon footprinting. So if you calculate a dLUC for your agricultural sourcing, for example, we'll say cocoa beans, can you use generic data for agricultural practices, land management, to build a PCF? Are there databases which provide accurate land management? I think this is
Is
a
this the
plan.
plan? I think this is the plan.
Per
Leah,
product or
thank
country.
you. Yes. If you calculate dLUC for your agricultural sourcing, you can use, well, generic data. You can use more generic data for your agricultural practices and land management to build a carbon product carbon footprint. And yes, HowGood has a database that provides accurate land management data per product and country for which to build your product carbon footprints, whether that's for complex materials or the simple first stages of processing of cacao or for fully finished goods. So yes, and thank you for the question.
And this is a question we raised with a number of people working at the GHG protocol and who were authors of the standard and of the upcoming guidance. And we did express opportunity to clarify this even further for everyone. So stay tuned there.
Great. Okay, a question from Henry, which he says is a beginner question, but I bet a lot of folks on the call have the same one. What are or who publishes the map layers that the individual polygons are cross-referenced with to drive those calculations? So where is that data coming from? Go ahead, Judy.
Yeah, I mean, that's coming from there's companies that are specializing in this work. Like I had mentioned, one of our partners that we're working with to get polygon data with satelligence. There are other companies that do this work. There's also companies that do traceability work that have a slightly different business model, but can still provide those shape files or polygon files that you need. If you're going to pursue that, it would be interesting to look at also what other information you can gather. You need some sort of yield information and again, the sourcing ratios. But while you're at it, what other information can you get? I think is an interesting question to pose.
Absolutely. I'm going to circle back around for our last question to the AI question, which there's actually more here that I think will be interesting to dive into. So the question is, how do you see the rise of AI contributing to or changing the processes, systems, or data sets for assessing land use change? And actually, sort of extra interesting, also for reducing land use change. Arthur, do you want to go ahead and take that to start?
Yeah. AI is going to be awesome for systems and data sets for assessing land use change and do nothing for reducing it. Probably will increase it just by dint of increasing demand and pressure on our economic systems. And I've got no optimism on AI actually reducing it, right? Like changing, unless AI is maybe enabling deep, fully like intercropped agroforestry systems and robots, which maybe way in the future is possible. But until we get there, I think it's going to be it's already improving the way we do spatial analysis, whether it's Global Forest Watch data or Ad Astra data. They're Ad Astra is doing it already. It's going to make it better and better and better, right? And we're doing this at scale and the sensitivity and subtlety that AI systems can apply, especially when we get into specialized imagery assessment rather than just LLMs. It's really, the same thing that like magnetic resonance imagery being interpreted in medical systems by AI, for cancer screening, things like that. This is the same type of task. So I think it will be very, very good. That oats problem referenced above should go away. The difference between pruning and deforestation should go away. Assessing pasture versus, all those things, wetlands and so on should go away. It's really, really cool. Especially also the baseline of knowing the density of the original forest and the true carbon counts there. That's improved immeasurably already, and that's only going to get better too.
Thank you. Yeah, pretty wild to think about.
That last question's a really good one. Should I
Go for
answer
it.
it
Yeah.
quickly?
Yeah.
Okay. So if calculating an emission factor for a commodity that's certified deforestation free, is it acceptable to use dLUC for the certified portion of the assessment period and sLUC for the non-certified portion? We think so, in a way. We're actually still going back and forth on this. This is an ongoing question. So for something like EUDR, where there is really clear traceability for the certified deforestation fee, there's probably a pathway here where you basically get dLUC all the way back, but you only get credit. You're only getting credit for the last 6 years but the polygon is for the whole time, right? And so the um, the question is for the non-EUDR deforestation free, that seems a lot less likely until there is, say, JDLUC in place for that area, for that specific commodity at that standard, which I think there is a very clear path to, but we might have to wait a couple of years for, say, Rainforest Alliance to be publishing its own validated JDLUC for soy or coffee from Brazil, let's say. So
And
it may be some time, but it's on its way.
and just to add to that real quick, I know we're at time, but deforestation is one type of land use conversion. Going to your certifier and making sure there's no other land use conversion occurring is going to be important. And I know they likely are focused on deforestation, but they really need to expand that because drained organic soils, depending on the geography, can have bigger impact than losing forest, right? So, and there's others as well. So just, I would have that conversation with your certifier, like, what are you doing to expand beyond deforestation?
Thanks, JD. All right, thank you all so much for joining. We're going to continue this sort of technical deep dive series. We looked at LSRS last time. We really got deeper into land use change this time. In our follow-up email, we'll be sending out the webinar recording, and we're going to go ahead and ask what are the other areas that you're really keen to hear directly from our research team on. So take a look at that. We're getting lots of questions about carbon leakage, lots of questions about carbon removals, choosing the right spatial boundaries. So yeah, keep an eye out for that email and feel free to make your wishes known on what you'd like us to cover in the future. All right, thank you so much for joining, and thank you, JD and Arthur, as always, and have a good rest of your day.